Silence is the most underestimated and misunderstood form of communication in a relationship. We are taught from a young age to talk things out, to voice our feelings, to fill the air with explanations and justifications. We believe that volume and verbosity equate to strength and clarity. But this is a fundamental error. True communication, the kind that transcends words and lodges itself in the soul of another, often begins where words end. Silence doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It doesn't beg to be understood. It just exists. Heavy, still, undeniable. It is the white space around the text of your arguments, the pause between the notes of your emotional symphony. And it is in that emptiness where the true meaning is often found. When you finally learn to use it, not as a weapon of spite, but as a tool of self-containment, it becomes the most refined and powerful instrument in your emotional arsenal. Most men operate their entire lives without grasping a crucial, almost primal dichotomy in the way the sexes often experience emotional security. A woman's reality is frequently built upon a foundation of attention. This isn't a superficial craving for compliments or flattery. It's a deep psychological need to feel seen, validated, and central to the emotional landscape of her partner. She navigates the world through a constant stream of feedback, a subtle and intricate dance of verbal and nonverbal cues. For her, attention is the currency of connection, the proof of her significance in your world. A man, conversely, often seeks peace. His sanctuary is a quiet mind, a space free from the relentless noise of emotional demands and unresolved tension. His sense of self is often built on competence and the ability to provide stability. And that stability is shattered in an environment of perpetual emotional turbulence. The moment you, as a man, consciously stop feeding that cycle of attention. The moment you deliberately let your emotional energy go quiet and still, the impact is seismic. She feels it in ways that words could never hope to reach. It's a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the relationship. It's a sudden, chilling quiet in a room that was once filled with the familiar, albeit stressful sound of your engagement. Words, no matter how harsh, are a form of engagement. They are a hook she can grab onto. She can argue with your logic, twist your meanings to fit her narrative, or dismiss your feelings as an overreaction. There is a game to be played with words, a battlefield where she knows the terrain. But silence offers no such handhold. It is a smooth, impenetrable wall. It doesn't react to her provocations. It doesn't explain its own position, leaving her no thread to pull, no argument to deconstruct. It simply is, and in its profound stillness, it leaves her utterly alone with the one thing she may have been trying to avoid, her own thoughts. This is the precise moment where the real, profound work of silence begins. A woman is an emotional navigator par excellence. Her strength often lies in reading the subtle currents of a relationship, the tone of your voice when you say you're fine, the look in your eyes when she walks into a room, the subtext of a simple text message. Every interaction is a data point, a signal that helps her chart the course of your connection. When you, the primary source of that data, suddenly go offline, her entire navigation system fails. The signals cease. The screen goes dark. Her internal compass, which once spun reliably, now gyrates wildly without a magnetic north to guide it. This void of information is not peaceful. It is terrifying. Her mind, deprived of external input, turns inward and begins to generate its own noise, the noise of anxiety. This is where her own mind becomes her punishment, and you never have to lift a finger. The questions start as whispers and quickly crescendo into a deafening roar. Is he mad at me? Is he over me? Is he seeing someone else? Did I push him too far? She will replay every recent interaction, scrutinizing it for clues she might have missed. She will mentally revisit every past argument, every time she dismissed your concerns, every time she tested a boundary, believing you would never truly enforce it. This relentless mental replay is a unique form of torture because it is self-inflicted. Your silence is merely the catalyst. The ammunition is her own uncertainty and the dawning realization of her own actions. The quieter and more composed you become, the louder and more frantic her internal anxiety grows. This is the core mechanism of silence. It creates a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Into that quiet space rush her deepest insecurities, her unspoken guilts, and her most brutal self-criticisms. It is a mirror held up not by you, but by the absence of you. And it forces a confrontation that words could never have engineered. The shift of power in a relationship is rarely announced with a declaration or a dramatic confrontation. More often, it happens in the quiet, in the space between words. It begins the moment you, as a man, consciously withdraw your emotional reactions and replace them with a profound and deliberate silence. This is not the sullen, petulant silence of a boy who isn't getting his way. This is the calm, collected stillness of a man who has recognized that his emotional energy is a finite and valuable resource, and he is no longer willing to spend it on a losing battle. When you make this shift, you are fundamentally altering the dynamics of control. She has always relied on one consistent, manipulable variable: your reaction. Whether through heated arguments, emotional pleas, subtle guilt, or even joyful engagement. Your responses were the levers she could pull to steer the emotional ship of the relationship. Your silence removes her hands from the wheel. This creates a void of uncertainty. And for a mind that thrives on emotional feedback, uncertainty is a form of psychological torture. A woman's imagination, when fueled by anxiety in the absence of concrete information, is a far more brutal and inventive prosecutor than reality could ever be. When you tell her you're upset, you give her a defined problem. She can then deploy her arsenal. She can justify her actions, manipulate the narrative to make herself the victim, or offer temporary comfort to placate you. There is a script, a back and forth, a dance she knows. But when you say nothing, the script is torn up. There is no defined problem to solve, no argument to win, no emotion to soothe. You offer her a blank page, and her own mind, in a state of heightened anxiety, begins to write the worst possible story upon it. She is left completely alone to imagine the why and her imagination. Untethered from the moderating influence of your actual perspective, will conjure demons far more frightening than the truth. This is where the mental replay begins, and it becomes a unique form of self-inflicted punishment. She will lie awake at night, scrolling through the archives of your recent history together. Every past argument will be re-examined, not from her perspective, but through the terrifying new lens of your silence. That text she ignored, which you once just sighed at, now seems like a catastrophic turning point. That time she tested you by flirting with someone else, thinking you'd get jealous and fight for her, now looks like a fatal miscalculation. The memory of you calmly explaining your needs, which she then dismissed as neediness or insecurity, now echoes as a prophecy she failed to heed. This replay is torture because it is conducted in the court of her own mind, with her as both the accused and the judge. The evidence is all there, and your silence has suddenly given it a weight and a significance it never seemed to carry in the moment. This process forces a crucial and uncomfortable realization. Your silence doesn't just make her wonder what is wrong with you or the relationship. It relentlessly guides her toward the question of what she did wrong. It acts as a mirror, and it's a mirror she cannot avoid, smudge, or turn away from. In the noisy engagement of arguments, she could always focus on your tone, your word choice, the reaction anything but her own reflection. But the quiet you provide offers no such distraction. The reflection she is forced to see is not the curated, justified version of herself, but the raw, unvarnished truth of her actions and their consequences. She sees the pattern of dismissal. She sees the taking for granted. She sees the manipulation for what it was. This reflection is rarely flattering, and the sight of it is what allows guilt to take root. This guilt is not the fleeting annoyance of being caught. It is slow, invasive, and inescapable. It begins as a small, nagging doubt in the back of her mind and grows, fed by every hour you remain calm and unreactive. She will remember the man who once cared so deeply, whose emotional landscape was an open book to her, and contrast him with the man who now acts with a serene indifference, as if she no longer occupies any significant space in his emotional world. This contrast, this stark shift from passionate engagement to peaceful detachment, is what truly begins to break her spirit. It's not your absence that wounds her most deeply. It is the profound indifference that your silence communicates. Your peace becomes the measure of her loss. This is the great and powerful paradox of this entire dynamic. You achieve this profound shift without ever having to lift a finger in anger or engage in a draining debate. You don't have to list her faults, keep a tally of her wrongs, or try to convince her of your pain. By simply choosing to protect your peace and withdraw your reactive energy, you set in motion a chain of events within her own psyche that does all the work for you. Your silence becomes the echo of her own actions. Every time she hears that echo in the quiet of her car, in the dark before sleep, in the lull of a conversation with friends, it reminds her of the sum total of every time she ignored you, dismissed you, or pushed you away. Words, no matter how hurtful, could eventually be rationalized, apologized for, and forgiven. They are part of the messy, noisy business of human connection. But silence is different. It is the quiet closing of a door. It is the end of the conversation and the beginning of her confrontation with herself. The journey into silence often begins not as a strategy, but as a necessity, a final, desperate act of self-preservation when all other forms of communication have failed. In its initial stages, this silence is agonizing. It is not peaceful. It is a vacuum, a withdrawal from a drug you didn't even know you were addicted to, the drug of emotional chaos. For so long, your identity within the relationship was tied to your reactivity. You were the explicable, the defender, the one who fought to be heard and understood. Your emotional energy was constantly spent in a futile attempt to fix, to clarify, to bridge a gap that the other person had no intention of crossing. When you first choose silence, you are not choosing power. You are choosing detox. You are forcing yourself to sit in a stark, quiet room with your own pain, your own frustration, and the most uncomfortable truth of all, the realization of how much of yourself you have lost in the process of begging for love from someone who offered only conditional attention. This period of forced stillness is brutal but transformative. It strips away the noise, the distractions, the endless cycles of what if and if only. As the emotional static fades, what emerges is a piercing, unforgiving clarity. You begin to see the relationship not through the lens of your hopes or her potential, but through the cold, hard light of reality. You see the patterns you were too invested to notice, how your patience was mistaken for weakness, your composure for coldness, and your consistent love for boring predictability. You tally the cost, not in terms of time or money, but in terms of spiritual and emotional energy. You see with horrifying lucidity how much of your life force was poured into the bottomless well of her approval that was designed to be perpetually just out of reach. The silence forces you to confront the part of yourself that believed you had to earn your worth through endurance, that tolerated disrespect in the name of love, and that fought to be seen by someone who had already decided not to look. This confrontation is the birthplace of a new man. The silence, once a reactive shield, begins to evolve into a proactive discipline. You are no longer withholding words. You are choosing peace. This is a critical distinction. The former is still about her, a tactic designed to provoke a change in her behavior. The latter is entirely about you, a principle designed to protect your sanity. You stop explaining yourself not to punish her, but because you have finally internalized the truth that explaining your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you is the ultimate act of self-betrayal. Your silence becomes a boundary, and it speaks louder than any argument ever could. It says calmly and absolutely, I am done trying to convince you. My peace is no longer negotiable. This is the essence of emotional sovereignty. You undergo a fundamental shift from being emotionally reactive to becoming emotionally intelligent. You learn through painful practice that not every emotion deserves expression. The fleeting urge to retaliate, the desperate need for the last word, the burning desire to make her understand your pain, these are all impulses that, when acted upon, only drain your power and pull you back into her chaotic orbit. By mastering the discipline of silence, you learn to let these impulses rise and then fall like waves against a cliff without being swept away by them. You realize that true strength is not found in winning an argument, but in recognizing that the argument itself is beneath you. You grow from a man who needed to be understood to a man who is content with being misunderstood, because your self-worth is no longer externalized. It is an internal conviction. It's built on the bedrock of your own respect. This transformation rewires your entire approach to connection. You are no longer ruled by your emotions, but by your standards. Your focus shifts from managing her feelings to curating your own energy. You begin to ask new questions. Does this person disturb my peace? Do they respect my time? Do our energies align? These questions replace the old, desperate ones. How can I make her happy? What did I do wrong? How can I get her to love me? This is the mark of a man who has moved from a state of lack to a state of abundance. He no longer chases. He selects. He no longer pleads. He observes. His silence is no longer a void, but a presence of calm, centered energy that is impervious to manipulation. This newfound stillness becomes your greatest asset. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can withstand the storm of your own emotions without being destroyed by them. You have looked into the abyss of your own neediness and have chosen to build a foundation of self-sufficiency instead. When you reach this point, your silence is no longer something you do. It is something you are. It radiates from you an aura of unshakable composure. People feel this shift, even if they can't articulate it. They sense that you are no longer easily triggered, that your validation comes from within, and that your attention is a valuable currency that must be earned, not demanded. This is the final stage of the evolution. The silent man is not a broken man. He is a complete one. He has integrated his pain into power, his heartbreak into wisdom, and his chaos into a profound, unassailable peace. He has learned that the most powerful statement a man can make is often the one he never speaks aloud. The initial phase of silence is often met with dismissal, a belief that this is just another mood, the temporary storm that will pass with the right amount of pressure or the right carefully chosen words. She may even feel a sense of relief, a liberation from the emotional demand she found so draining. But as days stretch into weeks, and your silence remains not as a sullen wall, but as a calm, open field, a subtle dread begins to take root. The power she once drew from your emotional responses, the fights she could win, the guilt she could leverage, the attention she could command has evaporated. Your non-reaction is a constant, quiet testament to a fundamental shift. And she is left with a terrifying realization. The lever she used to pull so effectively now connects to nothing. The machinery of the relationship is stopped, and her attempts to restart it are met with a profound and unnerving stillness. This is when the testing begins. It is not a conscious, malicious plan, but an instinctual, almost primal response to the loss of control. The silence becomes a void she feels compelled to fill, a puzzle she is desperate to solve. She will send a small, seemingly innocent text meme, a hey, a question about a shared utility bill. It is a probe, a tiny stone dropped into the well of your silence to gauge its depth. In the past, this would have been enough. You would have responded, and the familiar dance would begin again. But now, your non-response, or your calm, brief, and utterly non-committal reply communicates a terrifying new truth. You are no longer playing the game. You have become emotionally unavailable by choice, and this is what truly unravels her. It is one thing for a man to be distant because he is incapable of connection. It is another thing entirely for a man who demonstrated deep capacity for love to consciously withdraw it. This communicates that the problem was not his ability, but her worthiness. This is the moment the silence transforms from a personal slight into her most brutal and effective teacher. Stripped of the noise of your arguments and the distraction of your pain, she is left in a quiet room with herself, and the lesson is not a gentle one. The silence forces her to deconstruct the very narrative she has built for the relationship. What she once labeled as passion now looks unmistakably like dysfunction. What she called communication begins to feel, in the stark light of hindsight, like manipulation. The strength she prided herself on now reveals itself as a defense mechanism against vulnerability. Your peaceful absence holds up a mirror to the chaos she both created and thrived upon. Surrounded by the noise of new suitors or the empty reassurances of friends, she is haunted by the memory of your calm presence. The contrast is unbearable. The new men may be louder, more eager, more flattering, but their attention feels cheap and shallow. It lacks the depth, the weight, and the earned quality of yours. Your silence teaches her the difference between real love, which is grounded and demanding of accountability, and the superficial thrill of attention, which is fleeting and requires nothing of her. This realization is the monument to her own self-sabotage. Every time she tries to move on, the quiet you left behind whispers a simple, devastating accusation. You did this. Her silence is not a weapon you are actively wielding against her. It is the consequence of her own actions, given form and space. It teaches her what respect feels like in reverse. She is learning, through painful, solitary reflection, that actions have an undeniable weight. That love is not a game to be won, but a connection to be nurtured. That peace is not boredom, but the very safety she was desperately seeking, even as she destroyed it. This lesson is not delivered through your lectures or your anger, but through your absence. You are allowing the natural consequences of her behavior to become the teacher. And this is a curriculum she cannot argue with, dismiss, or manipulate. It is the curriculum of reality. The ultimate irony is that in losing you, she is also losing the mirror that reflected the best version of herself. You were not just a partner. You were a grounding force, a source of stability that allowed her to navigate her own chaos. Without that anchor, her instability becomes a personal, inescapable reality, not just a dynamic between two people. She begins to see how her ego, her pride, and her unexamined insecurities drove away the one thing that offered her genuine peace. The man who once calmed her storms has now become the calm that highlights her turbulence. Your silence, which she initially perceived as a punishment, reveals itself as the natural outcome of her choices. It is the quiet, dignified closure to a story she thought she was writing, but whose ending was determined the moment she chose to value control over connection and noise over peace. The final piece is not a destination you arrive at with fanfare, but a quiet dawn you one day realize has already broken. The silence that began as a reaction to her, then became a tool for your own evolution, now undergoes its final metamorphosis. It ceases to be about the relationship at all and becomes a spiritual principle, a fundamental way of engaging with the world. The energy you once poured into the void of her understanding is now redirected inward, and in that stillness, you find a voice you never knew you had, the quiet, confident voice of your own intuition. The noise of seeking external validation is replaced by the profound clarity of self-possession. You learn to hear the guidance that was always there, drowned out by the desperate clamor for someone else's approval. This is the moment you understand that sometimes people are removed from your life not as a punishment, but as a divine intervention. You were starting to idolize them over your own peace, and the universe, in its infinite wisdom, rebalance the scales. This inner stillness becomes your most reliable filter for life. It operates silently and efficiently, sifting people and opportunities without the need for dramatic confrontations or lengthy deliberations. Those who are drawn to drama find you uninteresting and drift away. Those who seek to manipulate find no handhold in your calm resolve. The fake, the disloyal, and the energetically draining are gently but firmly repelled by the gravitational field of your peace. Conversely, you begin to attract higher quality connections, people who respect boundaries, who value depth, and who understand that real strength is often quiet. You stop explaining your boundaries and start embodying them. Your very presence communicates your standards, and those who are meant for you will naturally align with them, without you ever having to plead your case. In this space, a profound shift occurs in your relationship with yourself. You start to genuinely enjoy your own company. Solitude, which once felt like loneliness, is now recognized as freedom. The energy that was once consumed by overthinking her actions is now channeled into building, creating, and growing. You pour yourself into your purpose, your health, and your passions. This is not a frantic distraction from the pain, but a focused investment in your own becoming. You are no longer a man defined by a reaction to a loss, but a man defined by his own direction. The silence has purified you, burning away the neediness, the desperation, and the attachment, leaving behind a core of disciplined intent and self-respect. It is at this precise point of genuine, an unshakable peace that a great irony unfolds. The world, sensing your wholeness, begins to chase what you have become. Your energy becomes magnetic. You are no longer the pursuer, but the point of attraction. This is especially true for her. The very peace she disrupted and you subsequently cultivated becomes the thing she is now drawn to, precisely because she cannot have it. She will see the evidence of your transformation, perhaps through mutual friends or the quiet confidence you project in a chance encounter. She will notice the calm in your eyes, the purpose in your stride, the way you are utterly unfazed by her presence. This is what truly breaks her, finally and completely. Not your anger, not your arguments, but your peace. Your peace is the living proof of your evolution beyond her, and it is the one thing she cannot fake, manipulate, or replicate. It is the final, unassailable truth. You no longer need closure from her. You have created it within yourself through acceptance. You understand that her absence was not a betrayal, but a brutal blessing. Without the noise of that relationship, you would have never been forced to find your own stillness. Without her leaving, you would have never learned how to stay grounded within yourself. The silence taught you that real strength isn't about holding on to what is hurting you. It is about letting go without hate, releasing the need for revenge, and understanding that your own evolution is the ultimate victory. You have turned heartbreak into wholeness, and that is a success no external relationship can ever surpass. In the end, silence wins. It does not win because it was loud or vengeful, but because it was lasting. Words fade, emotions cool, and the sharp details of arguments eventually blur. But the echo of your stillness endures. It lingers in the minds of those who underestimated it, a quiet reminder of a lesson learned too late. For her, one day sitting in the quiet of her own life, she will hear the silence she once mocked and finally understand its true nature. It was never her weapon to wield. It was yours. It was the sacred space you created to heal, the boundary that redefined your worth, and the tool that forged you into a man of substance. Your silence was the moment you stopped talking and started mastering yourself. And that is the kind of man who is never truly lost, because he has finally and irrevocably found himself. The story is over, not with a dramatic climax, but with a quiet, enduring peace that speaks more powerfully than any word ever could.